Welcome. It's wonderful to have you all with us. We would move forward and give you an overview of the training series. The training unfolds across 4 interconnected modules. The first module, which is today's module, lays the conceptual foundation by unpacking key ideas around colonialism and coloniality. The second module turns to collective reflexivity, where we reflect on power relations, institutional accountability, and how structures like racism, for instance, and white supremacy shape education. For modules 3 and 4, they're more practical. So we move towards practical side of the training, focusing on reimagining both content and pedagogy through dialogue, collaboration, and co-design. As you can see, each module builds on the previous one. So what we do today creates the background for the deeper exploration and applications that follow. We will start with the learning and pack in some key concepts. And the aims behind this module is to explore the core concepts of coloniality and its hierarchies and roots, examine the colonial matrix of power and its different axes, connect these frameworks to our own personal and institutional contexts, and also reflect on how coloniality continues to shape teaching practices today.
Thank you, Kaula, and thank you everyone for being here. So as we said, now we will be diving and what is colonization. And we will start with a small exercise. I would like to hear from you other words for colonization. What comes to your mind, others words that could define or describe what is colonization for you? So, well, we have different words, very interesting: violent imposition, occupation, exploitation, will of power, suppression, power taking, submission, problematic ongoing. I have doubts about one that is very much in the center is restoration, unequal economic relation, conquer, suppression, imperialism, coercion, subjugation, erasure, taking what is not yours, inequality, discrimination. So many of these words has a very negative connotation. The only one that is maybe not having this negative connotation is the one of restoration. So we will start in the 1492. And why we will start at that moment? Because the colonial theorists from Latin America considered this moment a very important moment in history where everything started. They are saying, okay, this is the first moment where all the different colonial empires start moving towards other territories to take other territories at the beginning, to find new roads for exchange and commercialization, but then later take over these territories. The colonial scholars are stating 1492 as the key moment where the process of transverting the history started. We could see that at that moment, most of these world empires that were in Europe were in their own places. But few years later, we can see how those empires were expanding through the world. We can see Spain taking over most of the territories of Latin America and the same of Portugal, but also France going towards different territories, and England expanding to what we know as North America, but also going to the south of Africa and also towards Asia. A lot of expansion from the Russian Empire towards the whole part of the East. In a very short time of periodic history, those territories were taken over, and then it really continued expanding until we're expanded almost all the world. After all these movements and taking over of the territories, started the process of independence of the territories. Could we say that colonization is over? We agree that not at all. Colonization is not over. I would like to share with you this map from the United Nations that was posted in 2023, so very recently, where they are talking about 17 territories that are still dependent on colonial powers. But if you notice the title of the map, they said non-self-governing territories. And if we go into the little letters in the corner, they are talking about administrative powers. They are not saying that they are colonizers. They are not talking about colonies. They are using other kind of language. Administrative powers and non-self-governing territories. Very soft to what it could be really happening in those territories. And we could see most of them in the map are, well, the powers are the United States, United Kingdom, and France. These are the three that United Nations are posting as administrative powers. And all these islands around as non-self-governing territories. All these colonial empires were practicing what we call colonialism. And colonialism is considered as this political, economic, social, and cultural system imposed by a dominant country through the colonization to exploit the territory's wealth and also the people. Something that is very important in this process of colonization is that these dominant countries are taking those territories by force. So this is the essence of colonialism and has been for many centuries in our history, but it has been kind of evolving. As you said, it didn't stop. Other term that we didn't see in the map, it is about settled colonialism. And what is this settled colonialism? It is the same system of operation, but it's basically a genocide and colonialism. Additionally to the colonialism power, they are displacing the national people, and that is mainly indigenous people, and replacing it with a new population, that is the settled populations. I will share with you one of the latest maps that has been created where these settled colonialism are still present. We can see exactly what we're saying. Palestine is one of those regions, but we have also Siberia, we have Australia, New Zealand, US, Canada, but also in Latin America, all the region of the River Plate. And in Africa, we have the Western Sahara. And we have this in Europe, in the north, the Sami people. That is something that many people do not recognize. All these different territories are considered until now settled colonialism process where is not just an event of elimination, but it is a process of elimination and exploitation of the native population, where genocide is much present. And yes, Israel is a very sensitive issue, but we need to speak it out. In this moment, we are seeing in front of us the genocide of the Palestinian people in a territory that belongs to them. So we consider settled colonialism what is happening in territorial Palestine. Also, all the different territories that we are seeing there in the map. This is a very important term we need to keep in mind because there are different forms of colonialism that are still very much present until today. What is the difference between colonialism and neocolonialism? Well, the scholars are telling us that there is another kind of colonialism where they do not rely on violence, but it uses different ways of approaching and taking those territories by market and cultural influence, enforcing this imperialism in these territories. For example, through the debt. Debts are really taking over those countries, and we can see how imperial colonialism that before were the colonies of those countries were taken over by the same colonial empires, now with different kind of market relationships. So it's a new form because they use other kind of tools, but the essence is the same. It is controlling, It is taking over the wealth and disrupting the political arenas of those countries and imposing cultural forms of seeing and understanding in those countries, eliminating them. We will go a little bit further there. I would like to propose you a small exercise where we can share an example of neocolonialism in education, in your practice as a teacher. Think about the system, but also in the practice that is happening right now. I'm seeing a comment about the crypto colonialism. In fact, there are many different kind of terms that we could use. And yes, it's not a violent way, and there are many ways that it's embedded in the market-driven empires, how they start looking into these different ways of co-opting people, of co-opting the way they use the culture to impose another ways, using just one measure for everyone. Everyone must learn or must know the same thing, and ignoring other ways of knowing and other ways of understanding. And this is precisely what we are talking about coloniality. The new technology, this is a very important thing that is happening right now. How we're using the technology, and the technology is imposed in a way, telling us that all our problems will be solved magically with technology. And what is happening is creating more inequalities. I have been discussing with some colleagues that are studying the use of these technologies and how creating different groups that are inducing some youngsters and kids even to commit suicide or to do a lot of harm. The use of technology, it could be really dangerous, and it is another way of co-opting the minds of the young people. We have a curriculum that is dominated by this Western knowledge. We have all these global rankings, what we were discussing just right now. We have the donor agendas that are shaping priorities, like what is happening with the technologies, powers that are very much interested in these technologies and the development of these technologies. The language policies that privilege colonial language. So the fact that we are now talking in English and not in another language. Our mother tongue is not English, but we are using it. This is part of some of the aspects that we can identify in the coloniality in education. Okay, with this little mapping, I would like to start to seeing how or what has been done until now. Many different scholars and researchers trying to see how we can break with all these different forms of colonialism, with all these different forms of violence that are neglecting and erasing the lives of others and the knowledge of others. I will focus mainly on the decolonial theory, but I would like to tell you that that is not the only theories that there are. We have post-colonial theories and we have anti-colonial theories that nowadays are going more towards the joining and thinking that we could mix all this together in this decolonial theory. But everyone comes from different perspectives, from different histories. So the post-colonial from the Indian scholars or Asian scholars that were subjugated by the English Empire, while the decolonial theorists are coming more from the Latin American side that were mainly subjugated by Portugal and Spain. They have different timing, where we are talking about the colonial thinkers and what was happening in Latin America. We are talking about 1492, but this is the precise moment when the colonizers arrived to Latin America, or what they call Latin America, but our ancestors were calling the Abya Yala. Those thinkers start saying that the decolonization or the independence that started in the 19th century was incomplete because it was only an independence of the legal political states. But the economic and cultural dependence continue until now. So as it was incomplete, this continue evolving and transversing different forms of power in different forms of affecting the people. They also refer this invasion of the Abya Yala territories, the beginning of what they were calling in Europe the modernity. And this category of modernity was built on the idea of race. The theorists were saying the colonizers invented this category of race just to create these hierarchies between the white and other peoples of color, putting at the first level the white people. And with this category, they could create this system of domination. Later on, other scholars were saying, okay, it's not only about race, but also we have gender and other intersectional aspects. But the main aspect at the beginning, what we're saying, it's race and gender. Later, we will see the class and also ethnicity. But this idea of modernity linked with the coloniality is very important to take into account, because it is thanks to the labor of the people in the colonies that those colonizers became more powerful and start developing their modern states that we know, and after became more and more wealthy. This is what the colonial theory is telling us. Colonialism is different of coloniality, because coloniality is a global pattern where the capitalist power arises from these colonies, from this imposition of a vision, even after the independence of those territories. The modernity that corresponds to this Western civilization model is based in this idea of the anthropocentric view and the Eurocentric view that only take into account as a valid, as important. It is what we are reproducing now in schools and are helping to deny or erase all that is outside of this canon. So coloniality and modernity articulates how the power relations move in our societies, based, as I said, in racial, ethnic, sexual, economic, and gender differences. We would like to understand how it works, this coloniality, through a matrix, what we call a matrix of power. So the coloniality of power, it is based on the idea that all these hierarchical dominations are based on this division of race, as I said, that has been enforcing the genocides in many territories, as we already discussed. The coloniality of gender, what it's telling us is that the colonization of all these territories are double for the women. It is not only about the race, but it's also about the gender subordination. And how we can perceive it in the current times is about the feminicides that are very much present everywhere in the world. We have also the coloniality of knowing, that is the imposition of this Eurocentric way of system thinking, where knowledge is produced through these lenses of neutrality and objectivity, erasing other type of knowledge, disregarding other types of knowledge with the idea that they are not objective, neither neutral. And with this myth of objectivity and neutrality, we can talk about an epistemicide, so killing many forms of knowledge, and mainly indigenous and local knowledge. This is also connected to the coloniality of being, where all these different colonialities are possible by the erasure and the dehumanization of the other. When we are talking about the coloniality of being, we are talking also on this intersectionality of hierarchies that says, in a way, who has the right to live and who has the right to die, in fact. Who could die because it doesn't deserve to be alive. And the ones who has the right to live is the ones that are in this hierarchical system in the top. So here again, we are talking about the erasures, but also the genocides of many people, like indigenous people, who are considered less than humans. Even today, when we see the speech of Netanyahu saying that they are non-human beings, they are human animals. And because of that, the colonizers have the right to kill them. Last but not least, we have the coloniality of nature. And all this is connected with the idea of the anthropocentric view of the world. This anthropocentric and way of seeing and understanding our relation with nature is what tells us in a way that we can use everything that is there outside for our own benefit, while indigenous people has other different kind of relating to nature, but has been erased through the coloniality of knowledge and the coloniality of being and power. These axes are interconnected and we cannot separate one from each other. So education is key and has been key until now, since the colonial powers until now, in holding and reproducing all these colonial powers, all this colonial violence that we can see in our world today.
Thank you, Adriana. A few moments ago, we explored with Adriana how colonialism hasn't ended really, but it continues to manifest in the structures of coloniality today. Now we turn from hearing about these dynamics to noticing them in practice using day-to-day objects. At first sign, they might seem to be just ordinary items, innocent, and just part of the rhythms of our daily lives. But if we look more carefully, we begin to realize that every object carries with it hidden stories. They can be of labor, of land, of knowledge, and silence, of whose presence is made visible and whose presence is erased. We will work through three stages. First, we will start with an individual reflection. Then we will share in small breakout rooms. And then we will move to plenary to share the takeouts from those discussions in the breakout rooms. We will use the 5 axes of coloniality: power, knowledge, being, gender, and nature, not as rigid boxes, but think of them more as lenses, as ways of sharpening our vision. Think of, for instance, what do I really know about where the object that I have came from? Whose work, whose bodies, whose lands are parts of its story, and who is left invisible? How my gender shape it, not just in the way that we use it, but also in marketing and the way it's valued from one gender to the other. What traces of extraction, land, or more than human life as well. You need to think of other beings on the planet as well, and how does that product affect them? As you write, try to focus on mechanisms rather than judgments. So instead of asking whether the object is good or bad, consider what systems make it possible, what stories does it silence, and which does it amplify. We won't retell individual stories, but instead we will listen to the facilitators. They can share some of the prominent axes that came up in the conversation, the mechanisms that were most visible, and what the process overall felt like.
So for us, actually, one of the key axes that were identified was the coloniality of nature, where a lot of participants were thinking about how their objects were made, the materials, or in what conditions they were made, the pollution. So that was a very common thread that we had in our group. And additionally, we had some very interesting key insights. There was a connection from ignorance to the coloniality of knowledge, actually, and also how ignorance is connected to how we let inequality happen because we just shut our eyes or we are not aware. And that can also be directly linked to the coloniality of knowledge. There was a very interesting point raised here that we use a phone, but we have no idea how to produce a phone. But on the other side of the world, someone has a very good idea of how actually to build a phone. Even though we have the finished product in our hands, we have no idea. There were a lot of feelings of sadness, overwhelm, especially in the times that we are in right now. How do we respond to those different coloniality axes that influence our teaching, especially on matters such as Palestine? We are directly influenced by the institutions around us that can silence our voices. I think overall that is also very hard to talk about these topics in general, because we are socialized in a specific way, and to break free and to have everyone listen to you is a very hard thing to actually achieve.
There is a lot of issues or difficulties that the teachers are having nowadays to raise their voices, even if we try to pay attention to some of the objects that we buy, and we try to be a little bit conscious. There are many things that escapes in our eyes because we like something and we just kind of, our emotions move us to this kind of behavior, and we forget to reflect. And so there is a question, okay, we should all the time thinking about what are our complicities, and then the idea that we can continue thinking about it. I think it's important to start recognizing our complicities in reproducing this colonial violence.
There was, for example, mentioned a bracelet that was more about the coloniality of nature, because stones are mined from the environmental destructive practices, especially from this global south, but it doesn't need to be. There was the example of trainers that on one hand, it's giving the feelings of freedom that comes also with the well-being, but also global sportwear's brand dominate the markets, which relying on the global south factories with the exploitative labor conditions, and also there were a reference to the coloniality of nature with materials such as rubber, leather, plastics that are also tied to extractive industries. Also, it was mentioned coloniality of gender, as sneakers marketing are often gendered, and for example, with the colors, there were emerging feelings of guiltiness, of discomfort, or how innocent items can become unsettling when viewed through coloniality. This feeling of like what to do, how to get out of this system, since, for example, some items can be avoided, some can be chosen over others based on some knowledge, how they are produced, where they are produced, but some of them are hard to be avoided, like a cell phone or a car, or all these necessary items in nowadays life. So there was also a struggle between awareness and negligence, and referring to the teaching practices, for example, feeling of teachers in a system that also reinforce colonial system unconsciously. So there was thoughts around this.
In my group, we discussed the coloniality of knowledge, starting from representations and how certain countries are glorified and their history is glorified even through representations and narrations, and how this can also link with perpetrating colonial hierarchies. We touch upon the coloniality of power and hierarchies that can be reproduced in a moment of purchasing, for example. So in the act of buying something, and an economical power that can be held over someone else. We touched upon also the complicity, and I really appreciated the authenticity of the professors, because they admitted that indeed there is some degree of complicity in perpetrating colonial dynamics or dominations. And we also touched upon the coloniality of beings, so identities and the recognitions, or in the way we see other ways of existing. And we touched upon the thematic of saviorism, so the feeling of helping and supporting someone because we have the power of doing so. And we also connected it with the entanglements with global systems and how, in a certain way, everybody felt maybe at a certain point unaware, but then gained awareness out of it and gained awareness of the systematicity of it.
Thanks a lot, and thanks a lot for all this sharing. It was really interesting to see how unaware we are. It was very difficult to recognize our complicities and recognize at the beginning when we are buying the things, we sometimes even don't think about it. But when someone is telling us, okay, let's reflect upon them, we start recognizing them very easily. I mean, it's evident. But what is a little bit less evident and also a little bit shocking and in a way uncomfortable, it's recognize that our privilege and the enjoyment of life and what we consider in the joy of life is based in the consumption of the lives of others. If we think about how a bracelet or a phone that is very normal to have in our daily lives, and we think that we cannot live without it anymore, we get trapped as a consumers. So in a way, we have been learning to take pleasure in consuming the nature, but also the lives of others. And we have also been learning things since we were kids that in a way is normal, that our satisfaction and our joy and our happiness is built in the suffering of the others and nature, because we are more than nature. We can control nature. It belongs to us. We think that it belongs to us. We have been teaching and we have been learning through centuries that we have the power over nature, and therefore we have the possibility to do whatever we want with all, not only the non-human beings, but also we don't think about the human beings that are behind the production of all these elements that for us produce the joy. In summary, we could say that we have been learning since the very beginning through the school process, in the school teaching, we have been learning that our lives are separated from others. We have been learning to just think about our own pleasure, but also being individualistic. First us and not thinking about the others. And also thinking of being separated from nature and not relating to nature. All these learnings is what we are inviting in this training to start thinking about it and how we can subvert all these learnings and how we can start turning in another way. What we can do to disrupt this violence and these ways of relating. So
I hope that all of you read The Parrot's Training, which is a new take on the original allegory where schooling becomes a literal cage. In case you have not read it, I will give you a very, very brief summary right now. Basically, in this allegory, like I said, schooling becomes a literal cage where the parrot is trapped in. The knowledge is strictly scripted, the time is regimented, and actual pages of books are fed to the parrot as food. By forcing the parrot to conform to all of these set ideas of knowledge and teaching, her actual voice fades away and she becomes silence. And eventually her entire spirit fell away. I heard in my own breakout rooms that the materials and the no free time and being pressed for time is definitely an aspect of the cage, that you're bound by time and also bound by the institution that sets that time. So maybe that is a common denominator that we can all agree on.
In our group, we're saying the importance of how we can share contradictory things with our students, because we need to question them, and not thinking of making more damage to the students, and then preventing them to think about all these different contradictions that we are living in this system in which we inhabit all together.
I would also like to add something. So we discussed mainly about the cage, because there were a lot of constraints starting from textbooks that are often expensive, and of course it becomes inaccessible for some students, and also the necessity to follow the content of a textbook could be limiting to some certain perspective and content. There were possible cracks of the cage through, for example, digital tools that can complement and expand beyond the textbook-based knowledge. There was a constraint of assessment and gradings based on standardized exams that disadvantage students from different backgrounds or with different abilities. And related to this, it was suggested, for example, to use flexible teaching practices like reducing homework, also prioritizing in-class work, and focusing on what was done more in the class rather than what was asked to be done by the students themselves.
In our conversation, one of the participants also raised the issue of the classroom itself being the cage. Sometimes we tend to focus on content, on pedagogy, while neglecting the environment itself. So one of the participants shared how in hot days, even the students raised the concern of why not go outside and have the classroom, but it's considered inappropriate. It's not acceptable for a teacher whose mission is to convey a message and guide their learners to step outside of that cage. The classroom in itself is repressing.
But also what was very interesting in our group was saying that it is not only the students who are in the cage, but also they are sharing together with the teachers. So teachers and the students are on the cage, very, very well locked. Congratulations, you made it for the first session. We would like that you please take a step back and reflect on all the things that are happening today, to feel free to continue these reflections and to stay with the trouble. Thanks a lot for this engaging session. We hope to see you in the next model.